There are women whose names survive history with the weight of empires attached to them. And then there is Cleopatra, not the seductive caricature of later Roman poets, not the painted temptress that Hollywood dressed in jewels. The real Cleopatra was something far more dangerous. She was a strategist, a mathematician, a polyglot who spoke 9 languages, a queen raised inside a labyrinth of dynastic murders, political betrayals, and economic fragility. Her throne was built on a fault line. Her survival depended not on beauty, but on understanding the invisible pressures shaping her world. To enter her story, imagine the air of Alexandria at dawn, a pale, peach-colored light gliding across the harbor, ships with swollen sails drifting like shadows across the water, the scent of salt, the murmur of markets awakening, and above it all, the lighthouse of Pharos rising like a pillar between earth and sky, its flame visible for miles. This was the stage of Cleopatra's youth, a city of scholars, merchants, philosophers, mathematicians, and spies. Each street corner whispered secrets. Each library scroll held worlds. Cleopatra absorbed them all. She grew up in the last chapter of a dying dynasty. The Ptolemies had ruled Egypt since the days of Alexander, but their power was brittle. They fought each other more fiercely than they fought their enemies. Fathers killed sons. Sons poisoned mothers. Siblings married and murdered one another in the same breath. Cleopatra navigated this world the way a sailor navigates storms. She learned to predict the shifting winds of alliances. She learned to sense danger in silence. She learned that survival depended not on might, but on leverage. When her father, Ptolemy XIII, fled Egypt after a rebellion, Cleopatra went with him to Rome. She was still young then, but she saw something extraordinary. She saw the Roman Republic from within. The Senate, the patrician class, the financial families who controlled trade routes stretching from Gaul to Judea. She saw how Rome consumed the world through debt, diplomacy, and calculated cruelty. And unlike other monarchs, she did not fear Rome. She studied it. When she returned to Egypt, she entered a land on the brink of collapse. The Nile had flooded irregularly for years, reducing crop yields. Famine threatened villages. Corruption rotted the administration. And her brother, her co-ruler, sought to push her aside. Cleopatra understood that she needed more than political power. She needed economic power. She needed the kind of leverage that a younger Newton would later seek in mathematics, the kind that allowed a single decision to alter the fate of nations. She found that leverage in something deceptively humble: grain. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Its annual floods produced a surplus unlike any other region. Rome needed that grain. Its cities swelled with citizens who no longer farmed. Its armies marched on wheat. Its stability depended on a full stomach. Cleopatra saw what no other ruler fully grasped. Grain was not a crop. It was a weapon, and she wielded it not with force, but with intent. During her early reign, Cleopatra took direct control of Egypt's agricultural system. She monitored the Nile floods personally. She appointed new overseers in the Fayum region. She reorganized the granaries. And most importantly, she set prices strategically. When the Roman Republic descended into civil war, Cleopatra began to sell Egyptian grain at precise moments to specific Roman factions. To Caesar's supporters, she offered shipments at favorable rates. To his rivals, she tightened supply. She did not declare allegiance. She allowed the market to declare it for her. This was the beginning of her true power. Rome thought it was choosing Cleopatra. In reality, Cleopatra was choosing Rome. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, seeking order after a chaotic civil war, he stepped into a palace where the queen had already calculated every variable. The night she met him, wrapped in a rug or a linen sack, depending on the source, smuggling herself past hostile guards, the gesture was not romantic. It was mathematical. She understood Caesar's psychology, his ambition, his hunger for legacy, and she offered him something no Roman general could resist. Not her beauty, her empire. Cleopatra had studied the Hermetic traditions preserved in Alexandria's libraries. She knew the ancient priests believed that the earthly kingdom mirrored the celestial one. As above, so below. A queen aligned with cosmic order could reshape earthly fate. And she acted like it. She did not meet Caesar as a supplicant. She met him as an equal force, a woman who had already learned to bend the economy of an empire. With Caesar, she secured more than protection. She secured the restoration of Egypt's debts, the expansion of her rule, and the chance to stabilize the Nile economy. Together, they entered a period of prosperity so sudden that historians often overlook its design. Cleopatra restructured taxes. She re-established trade with Nubia. She sent exploratory missions up the Nile in search of new gold mines. She built a navy. And she began storing grain not for famine, but for strategy. She was no longer merely a queen. She had become the architect of Egypt's leverage. Her partnership with Caesar was not a love affair in the ordinary sense. It was a fusion of two minds who understood that power was not created through force alone. It was created through alignment. Rome had men. Egypt had resources. Together, they commanded both. But power built on a single alliance is fragile. And when Caesar fell beneath the blades of the Senate, Cleopatra faced the void again. Rome fractured. Loyalties shifted. Generals rose and fell like waves. And yet Cleopatra did not panic. She did what Hermetic thinkers had always done. She looked for the pattern beneath the chaos. She identified it in Marcus Antonius. Antony was impulsive, charismatic, and militarily gifted. But he lacked Rome's most essential power: food. His legions needed Egyptian grain. His war chest needed Egyptian gold. His men needed supplies for campaigns stretching from Armenia to Greece. Cleopatra could provide all of it, and she knew exactly what he would offer in return. Territory, security, an empire she could shape. This was the essence of her infinite leverage. While Rome fought with swords, Cleopatra fought with scarcity and abundance. She controlled the resource that controlled the world: grain that could feed or starve nations, gold that could fund wars or end them, fleets that could shift balance, knowledge stored in scrolls that Rome envied but could not read. Cleopatra wielded these things the way a Hermetic adept wields symbols, not as objects, but as extensions of will. As her alliance with Antony deepened, she reached the height of her power. She minted coins with her own image. She took command of military decisions. She secured the lands of Cyprus, Cilicia, and parts of Syria. Egypt became not merely a kingdom, but a central node in the Mediterranean economy. Every shipment of grain that left Alexandria was a thread in Cleopatra's web. Every Roman general who needed supplies was trapped in it. Her brilliance lay not in domination, but in correspondence. She understood the laws governing empires the way alchemists understood the laws governing transformation. She knew that the macro shapes the micro. The fate of armies depended on the fate of harvests. The stability of Rome depended on the predictable rhythm of the Nile, and the rhythm of the Nile depended on her. Yet beneath this ascendance, the first shadows of her downfall began to appear, not because her strategy failed, but because the world she manipulated was shifting into forces even she could not contain. Before we reach that turning point, we must explore the philosophy that shaped her worldview, the Hermetic Law that guided her decisions, the same law that will shape the financial lesson of this chapter. The deeper you walk into Cleopatra's world, the more you realize she did not rule through charm or spectacle. She ruled through comprehension. She understood the architecture of power at a level few rulers ever touched. Her decisions were not random strokes of boldness, but reflections of a worldview shaped by philosophy as much as by politics. She lived in Alexandria, after all, a city where priests guarded millennia-old manuscripts, where the descendants of Greek philosophers debated beside Egyptian astrologers, where the Hermetic texts were copied and recopied in the flicker of candlelit scriptoria. Cleopatra was not indifferent to this world. She breathed it. She was educated at the Mouseion, the great scholarly center attached to the library. There she learned mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and something far more subtle. She learned the principle that governed much of ancient Egyptian statecraft, the idea that the visible world is a mirror of the invisible one. The priests of Heliopolis taught that harmony in heaven creates harmony on earth. The Greek philosophers taught that patterns repeat across scales. The Hermetic texts taught that the microcosm and the macrocosm reflect each other. As above, so below. This phrase was not abstract to Cleopatra. It explained everything about the world she ruled. Egypt itself was a system of correspondences. When the Nile rose, the people prospered. When it failed to rise, famine spread. When famine spread, armies weakened. When armies weakened, foreign powers advanced. The health of the river dictated the health of the nation. The stability of the harvest dictated the stability of the crown. Cleopatra learned to read the Nile as other rulers read political treaties. She studied its cycles, its moods, the star alignments that foretold its floods, the rituals meant to invite its abundance. To Cleopatra, the river was not water. It was destiny. This worldview shaped her policies long before she met Caesar or Antony. She recognized that Egypt's strength came not from its armies, but from the predictable rhythm of the Nile and the agricultural abundance it produced. She realized that Rome, despite all its legions, was fragile in ways Egypt was not. It depended on grain imports. It depended on a population that no longer tilled fields. It depended on long supply chains vulnerable to storms, pirates, and political unrest. And so Cleopatra made a decision that marked her as one of the sharpest economic minds of the ancient world. She would turn Egypt's agricultural surplus into a tool for shaping geopolitical reality. Here is where the Hermetic Law of Correspondence becomes more than mystical poetry. Cleopatra began to see that the state of Rome's economy reflected the state of its politics. When the Senate was divided, inflation rose. When wars stretched Roman armies across continents, shortages struck the capital. When Rome consumed more than it produced, it became dependent on those who produced more than they consumed. Egypt. Her Egypt. Cleopatra understood that she could influence Rome's decisions by influencing Rome's hunger. The law of correspondence also shaped her reading of individuals. She sensed that Caesar's vision for Rome mirrored her vision for Egypt. He wanted stability after chaos. She wanted autonomy after generations of Ptolemaic dysfunction. She understood that the microcosm of Caesar's personality mirrored the macrocosm of Roman politics. Ambitious, expansive, unstable. She approached him not with adoration, but with alignment. She offered him the one thing that stabilized both their worlds: supply. When Caesar died, she saw that Antony's internal landscape mirrored the external landscape of Rome in another way. He was powerful but fractured, influential but impulsive, capable of greatness but vulnerable to distraction. Cleopatra recognized these reflections instantly. She did not underestimate him. She did not overestimate him. She understood him. And in that understanding, she found a path to preserving Egypt's sovereignty. If someone were to ask what her true gift was, it would not be beauty. It would be perception. Cleopatra possessed the rare ability to see how the internal nature of individuals mirrored the external nature of states. She sensed that Antony's emotional volatility mirrored Rome's political volatility. She sensed that Octavian's calculating calm mirrored Rome's emerging desire for order. She sensed that her own people's fear mirrored the uncertainties of the Nile. And she recognized that no decision existed in isolation. Everything echoed something else. This is the heart of the Hermetic Law she embodied. Correspondence is not about superstition. It is about pattern literacy. It is about seeing how a small change in one place reveals a larger change elsewhere. Cleopatra applied this principle to economics with a precision that rivaled modern strategists. She observed that grain prices in Alexandria could predict political shifts in Rome. She noticed that fluctuations in the Nile's flood level could foreshadow years of military expansion or contraction. She tracked the movements of merchant fleets the way astronomers tracked constellations. And she understood something few rulers dared to admit. Empires rise not from ideology, but from resources. Power is food. Influence is supply. Leverage is the ability to control what another nation cannot live without. Cleopatra recognized that Egypt's granaries were not storage rooms. They were the fulcrum of Mediterranean stability. And she placed herself at the center of that fulcrum. Her philosophy was not abstract contemplation. It was applied cosmology. It was the recognition that a queen must understand the forces operating above her if she wishes to shape the world below her. Caesar and Antony understood tactics. Cleopatra understood context. They commanded legions. She commanded tide and harvest. They chased glory. She managed cycles. This is why Rome feared her more than they feared any other monarch. Not because she was seductive, because she was structural, because she understood the deeper machinery of empire, because she recognized that Rome's appetite was its weakness, because she could read the patterns that guided nations the way others read omens in the sky. Before Antony's alliance solidified, Cleopatra made a gesture that reveals her worldview more clearly than any legend. She sailed to Tarsus not as a supplicant, but as a sovereign force. Her barge, draped in purple sails, carried gold statues, scented oils, musicians, and philosophers. Roman writers later mocked this display as decadence. They misunderstood it. Cleopatra was not showing opulence. She was demonstrating correspondence. She was teaching Antony that the microcosm of her arrival mirrored the macrocosm of her empire. Abundance, control, confidence, rhythm. She was telling him without words that Egypt was the source of the prosperity he sought. But correspondence is a dangerous power. It reveals patterns, but it also reveals limits. For if the micro mirrors the macro, then the instability rising inside the Roman Republic would someday mirror instability in the world surrounding Cleopatra herself. She sensed this, though she resisted it. She felt the shifting winds of Octavian's ambition long before it reached its height. She saw how his temperament reflected a world increasingly dominated by order rather than charisma. She understood that he mirrored a new Rome, disciplined, strategic, cold. This is where the philosophy begins to converge with the financial lesson that will close the chapter. Cleopatra mastered correspondence. She understood the macro because she studied the micro. And she understood the micro because she observed the macro. She wielded economic leverage by reading the rhythm of scarcity and abundance. But no matter how deeply she understood the patterns governing the world, she could not escape the one truth Hermetic thinkers always acknowledged. All correspondences flow within cycles. Dominance rises and falls. Abundance waxes and wanes. Empires ascend and decay. Cleopatra read the cycles. But she lived in one she could not fully control. Before we turn to the financial lessons her story reveals, we must watch the pattern reach its breaking point. We must see how leverage becomes vulnerability. We must see how macro forces overwhelm even the sharpest strategist. And we must see how the end of Cleopatra's reign contains a philosophy that modern minds still struggle to grasp. The final years of Cleopatra's reign unfolded like the tightening of a cosmic spiral. Everything that had once been in harmony began to slip out of alignment, as if the patterns she had mastered were shifting beneath her feet. She had lived her life following the Hermetic Law of Correspondence, interpreting the world through echoes and reflections, reading the Nile as a mirror of human affairs and reading Rome as a mirror of the world's hunger. But correspondence is not control. It is perception. And perception, no matter how sharp, cannot halt the turning of cycles. In the beginning, Cleopatra still believed she could bend the pattern. She and Antony commanded enormous influence. Together, they held territories stretching from Egypt to Armenia. Their combined forces rivaled those of Octavian. The wealth of Egypt filled Antony's war chest. Their fleets dominated the eastern Mediterranean. Their armies were seasoned, their alliances deep. Cleopatra believed the macrocosm still reflected her microcosm. Abundance above, abundance below. Power above, power below. But then, the river spoke. The Nile failed to flood. It is easy for a modern mind to underestimate the scale of that disaster. In ancient Egypt, the Nile's flood was not merely environmental. It was existential. It determined whether people ate or starved, whether markets thrived or collapsed, whether new construction began or halted. Cleopatra saw the significance instantly. The cycles were shifting. The land was warning her. She responded with decisive brilliance. She opened the royal granaries. She redistributed stored wheat to prevent famine. She lowered taxes in affected regions. She commissioned emergency irrigation. The people did not revolt. They remembered that Cleopatra was the queen who had personally studied the Nile's cycles. They trusted her. She bought time. But time is not infinite, even for a woman who played empires like instruments. The drought strained Egypt's economy precisely when Antony needed more resources for his war against Octavian. His armies were growing restless. His generals whispered doubts. His confidence began to unravel. And Cleopatra watched him the way she watched the river, reading the signs. Antony's moods no longer corresponded to opportunity. They corresponded to desperation. A dangerous inversion had begun. Where once the micro echoed the macro, now the micro distorted it. Antony's internal chaos bled into the external world. Correspondence had become misalignment. Meanwhile, in Rome, Octavian studied Cleopatra with the cold precision of a man who understood the power of narrative better than any statesman before him. He did not attack her armies first. He attacked her reputation. He told the Roman people that Cleopatra was not a queen, but a foreign temptress. He claimed she had bewitched Antony. He circulated pamphlets portraying her as a threat to Roman virtue. He declared that she sought to move the capital to Alexandria. Every rumor became a weapon. Every fear became an argument. Octavian wielded propaganda the way Cleopatra once wielded grain. This is where the Hermetic Law reveals its cruelty. The same principle that gives power through perception also destroys power through perception. As within, so without. The internal fear of Rome mirrored the external shift in the Mediterranean. The microcosm of Roman anxiety began shaping the macrocosm of Roman policy. Cleopatra had mastered leverage. Octavian mastered psychology. And psychology, in the end, proved stronger. The confrontation became inevitable. At Actium, Cleopatra and Antony assembled a massive fleet. They believed their combined forces would overwhelm Octavian's. Their ships were larger, their coffers deeper, their alliances older. But the sea does not obey numbers. It obeys rhythm. And that day, the winds turned against them. Their heavy ships struggled. Octavian's lighter vessels sliced through the water. The pattern had fully shifted. As Antony's lines faltered, Cleopatra made the decision that has divided historians for centuries. She withdrew her ships. Some say it was panic. Some say it was strategy. But the truth is simpler and more painful. She saw the correspondence before anyone else did. She saw that Antony's defeat on the water mirrored a deeper defeat within his spirit. She saw that no amount of Egyptian wealth could reverse the internal decay of his command. She saw that the rhythm of power had left him. And so she sailed away to preserve what remained of Egypt. The aftermath was not a collapse of intellect, but a collapse of leverage. Antony followed her, but his armies did not. Octavian advanced. Cities surrendered. Grain shipments halted. Egypt's economy, once the fulcrum of Mediterranean stability, became vulnerable for the first time in decades. Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, the city of her birth, the city she had once shaped with such precision. She entered the palace not as a defeated monarch, but as a woman facing the final phase of a cycle she had long understood was coming. Even then, she remained rational. She attempted one last negotiation with Octavian. She offered tribute, treasure, trade. She tried to leverage Egypt's remaining wealth into terms that would preserve her children's futures. She tried to read Octavian the way she had read Caesar and Antony. But Octavian did not mirror them. He mirrored a new force in the Mediterranean: order without warmth, logic without mercy, ambition without alliance. His mind reflected the world to come, a world where Rome no longer shared power, but consumed it entirely. Cleopatra saw there was no correspondence left to negotiate with. Her final act was not melodrama. It was alignment. She chose a death that preserved her sovereignty, her dignity, and her narrative. She refused to be paraded through Rome in chains. She refused to let Octavian turn her into a symbol of conquest. She refused to let her end be dictated by the man who had mastered propaganda. She died as she lived, on her own terms. And when Octavian found her, lying on a bed of gold cloth, he stared at her not with triumph, but with calculation. He knew that the world had lost more than a queen. It had lost a mind that understood the structure of empire better than any senator in Rome. He knew that he had not simply defeated a nation. He had defeated a worldview. But Cleopatra's story does not end with her death. Because across the centuries, one truth remains. She demonstrated the Hermetic principle of correspondence in its purest form. She showed that the macro shapes the micro. She showed that resources shape power. She showed that supply shapes politics. And she showed that a single queen, armed with knowledge of patterns, can alter the trajectory of continents. Now, her story becomes our lesson. The philosophy must now become finance. The question is no longer how Cleopatra saw the world. The question is how you can see your world the way she saw hers. How macro forces shape your personal fortune. How cycles influence your opportunities. How leverage rises from what you control and decays when you ignore the tides.